Hello fellow cinephiles, Film Guru here. Today I'm reviewing Tarantino's new film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And this stars Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio and Margot Robbie and a variety of others. And this really looks at fated television actor Rick Dalton, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his stunt double, Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. It really looks at how they're trying to achieve fame and success in the film industry during the late years of the Hollywood's golden age in the 1969 Los Angeles. And it really looks at their trials and tribulations, and it takes place over 2 days, and we get to see who these guys are, the friendship that they have, and ultimately how they're trying to pave their way and trying to make something of themselves. Rick Dalton's a guy who was in a popular TV show, and then he decided he wanted to become a film actor, and he hasn't been quite successful at that. So it really looks at how he's trying to break into that. And he feels he's a bit of a has-been, but he feels he wants to achieve something else before the end of his life. And it sort of looks at that, and it looks at Cliff Booth, who hasn't really had a job as a stuntman for the last 8 years, and he's become a bit of a gopher, you could say, for Rick Dalton, and he drives him around and does bits and pieces for him. He fixes his TV aerial and stuff like that. And it really looks at the relationship between these two guys. And it also looks at Margot Robbie's interpretation of the Sharon Tate, and how she's sort of making her way around town, trying to make something of herself as well, and trying to become a film star, and the way she goes about that, and her relationship with her husband Roman Polanski, and how that sort of was. This film really is very different to a lot of other Tarantino films. He doesn't have a straight structured story or narrative, and it's really just a fly on the wall, a day in the life sort of film that we get to follow these particular characters as they go about their daily job, and we learn who they are as people. And this sort of broke conventions with what he'd done before, where he'd had a strong story. It didn't have a strong start like a lot of his other films, such as Inglourious Basterds, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, and all the other films that sort of had this. This doesn't really have this. It sort of shows these old TV shows and Bounty Law that Rick Dalton was in. We get to see a bit of that, and it sort of focuses on that, and it has this sort of bit of an interview, and then it sort of goes into a conversation piece between Rick Dalton's character and Al Pacino's producer character within this bar, and that's kind of interesting to watch as well. But it doesn't start the same as every other Tarantino film. It doesn't have the oomph that every other Tarantino film has. But he's doing something different and refreshing, and I kind of liked what he was trying to do with this film. On the first viewing, I didn't quite enjoy every aspect of this movie, and I didn't really love the Rick Dalton character. I didn't think he was really great. I think Cliff Booth was the better character, and I would have loved to have followed him the whole film. But upon the second viewing, I could really see what Tarantino was trying to do. And a lot of people akin this to like Big Lebowski, in that you have these really colourful and interesting characters who just things happen to, and we go on the journey with them. And I think that this film is really like that. And you could go as far as to say that the Cliff Booth character is like the dude. I think this is really a time capsule of the 60s. And when it's sort of a time capsule of what Tarantino remembers from the 60s as well. He was like 6 or 7 at the time, and there's a lot of references in this film to stuff he experienced or saw or watched on television at that age. He's trying to convey that as a person, and what it was like to be a kid at that time, and when he heard about the Manson murders and a variety of other things. I think in a lot of ways this film is for himself. He hoped that people would like it and his fans would enjoy it, but it's sort of a story he wanted to tell and be part of. And I think there's a lot more going on in this film than it seems on top. And the characters are very complex and interesting, and there's a lot more happening. Just people aren't really getting it, I don't think. And I think this is a film that's going to cause a lot of people to either like it or hate it. There's no one going to be sort of in the middle. So there was things about this film I liked and things I didn't. So I'll sort of start with the positives. It's beautifully shot, it looks fantastic. It really is a time capsule of 1969. We'll get a real sense of the place. Everything feels authentic, and it feels like a film that was made in the 60s in a lot of ways. And I think that's a great contributing factor to Tarantino as a filmmaker and a storyteller and what he's trying to do here. I think all the acting is fantastic. Leonardo DiCaprio does really well here as Rick Dalton. when we get to see him act in things, and when he's acting, he's very believable and he's really good. But then when he's playing just himself, like the Rick Dalton character, he's got a lot of self-doubt. He's put in a little stutter and mannerisms to say he's sort of not as confident as he seems. He's kind of a sad and pathetic character in a lot of ways. But for an actor of DiCaprio's caliber to play a character like this, who's unsure of himself, who doubts himself, who thinks he's pathetic and he's worn out and he's a has-been, is just fantastic to watch. And there's a handful of scenes in this film that really show that. I really like, there's a scene between him and this young girl that he's acting in this TV show, Lantern, this pilot episode. There's this young actress there, she's about 8 years old. And the conversation they have is fantastic. And she really sort of points out to him, trying to tell him, you know, take your craft, your acting a lot more serious than you are. And this scene is really great because you get a real sense of who Rick Dalton really is. He's reading this book and he relates solely to this character, and he's sort of so affected by this character that this young girl sees that. And this moment is really fantastic, I think, and he really shines in this. And then the other scenes that sort of littered throughout it that really shine is more towards the end of what he does, and he has this great moment right at the end of the film. I won't get into too many spoilers here if you haven't seen it, but for those who have seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And he's fantastic in those scenes, and I think DiCaprio is really great in this and playing a character he doesn't quite play all the time, and I really like that. There's a lot of humour with his character, and there's a lot of things that he added that was fantastic. I think Margot Robbie is really great here, playing a version of Sharon Tate. Some people have bashed her performance here, saying that she doesn't serve much of a purpose and that she's not in it enough. I just feel that what she represents is like the heartbeat of the film. That's what Margot Robbie said herself. She represents the heartbeat of the film. There's something really beautiful and angelic about her. There's something that draws you into her. And just by what she does, not necessarily what she says. Not necessarily by what she says, but what she does, you're sort of drawn to her, and you sort of feel protective of her. You don't want anything to happen to her because she feels like such a precious thing, such a beautiful creature, that you don't want anything bad to happen to her. And I think that's what her character represents. And she has some really great scenes, especially the scene where she goes to the cinema to watch her own movie and explains to the people at the counter behind the booth who she actually is. And I thought that scene was really great. And she goes into the cinema and she has these big glasses. It's just a really great sequence. And I think just watching her on screen, she's mesmerizing. And I really like what they did with her. And I don't think people should bash her performance. I think she did a fantastic job. And like I said, she's just a really fascinating character to watch on screen, where she doesn't even have to say anything, but you're really drawn into her. And I think Margot Robbie really captured the essence of Sharon Tate in many ways. She looks like her. There's a great close-up when she's driving that you can really sense. And she sort of conveys such a sweetness that I think Sharon Tate had, and I really loved that. The person who owns this film, the character, in my opinion, is the best and steals the show, is Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. Brad Pitt is fantastic. This is probably one of the best roles he's ever had. And I think he's fantastic to watch in this. And he's a character you can really get behind. He doesn't say a lot, but there's something about him. There's a coolness about him. There's a Big Lebowski, the dude feel about him, where he just sort of goes along with things. He doesn't fight too much, and he just deals with things when they arise and doesn't seem to worry too much about what's going on. And he's comfortable to be part of Rick Dalton's world, where he doesn't really do much stunts. It's more of a gopher. He drives him around, he does things like that, but he doesn't mind that. He has so many great sequences in this film and scenes. He's very, very funny and has some of the best lines and dialogue. Some of the scenes I really liked is where he first goes home after driving Rick Dalton around. We get to see him drive the car like a stuntman would, and he goes across town. He goes so far out to get to he go home ultimately, and he lives in this shitty sort of tin caravan, and he lives out the back of this drive-in cinema, and I really loved that. We get a sense of who he is. And when we go inside this caravan, we just see old photos and magazines and bits and pieces in there that really sum up who he is. That we don't have to be told who he is, we can just gather who he is from what he has in his particular caravan. He has his dog, Brandy, which is a fantastic dog, and the relationship between these two is fantastic to watch. There's this really great sequence where he's getting her dinner ready and she sits on the chair watching him, and there's a great back and forth between man and animal, and I really love that, and their relationship is so strong, and that sets up something that happens much later in the film, and I really love that, and I got a real sense of who he was, which I thought was brilliant. Another scene I really liked him in is where Mike Moore is playing Bruce Lee, and their sequence together is fantastic, very funny. Brad Pitt's great, Mike Moore is really great as well, and there's people that show up in that scene, and it's just really fun to watch. And a lot of people have gone about the controversy about it. I just think Bruce Lee was he was a showman. He put on shows for people. He entertained people, and I think this really captured that. And just because he was a good fighter doesn't mean he always won every fight. And I just think that people are getting upset about the wrong things with this. I've even heard someone say it's racist, but I don't quite get that. I just think it's a great sequence, has a great joke, and there's a good setup to it, and I thought that was fantastic. The other two scenes that he really stands out in is where this sequence with Margaret Qualley, I think her name is. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. Her relationship, how they keep seeing each other. They see each other 3 times. She's trying to get a lift, and he's always going in a different direction. And there's sort of a bond relationship that starts between these two without them actually meeting. And then when they finally meet, there's some great sequences between these two, and he ultimately has to take her back to the Spawn Ranch, and where we meet most of the Manson family. This is really great. It's filled with tension. You're not quite sure what's going to happen. The choices that are made by Cliff Booth here and why he's doing what he's doing really create a great cinematic moment, and there's a real tension builder here, and it feels a lot like what Hitchcock used to do. And I think it's a great set piece, and it sets up many things within this film that I really love. And he's just so great in it. And there's a moment towards the end of that scene where he just shines and is fantastic. He's a character you really don't want to mess with. He seems nice and friendly, and he can be that, but if you cross him, he's quite aggressive and scary, and I love that about him. No one really messes with him, and I think that's fantastic. And the other scene that I really loved him in is the ending. He owns the ending. The ending is fantastic in his regard. For those who've seen it, you know exactly what I mean. And the ending is quite surprising and shocking, and the film doesn't really go the way you expect it to. And I really loved that. It felt refreshing in that regard. Like I said, I went and saw it twice. The second time I got a lot more out of it. A repeat viewing quality. It seems to get better every time you see it, and you understand a lot more what's going on, and you kind of get why Tarantino made this film in the way he made it. Like I saw an interview yesterday where he was talking about how he had originally had a story and an arc for all the characters, but then he decided he didn't really want to do that. He sort of just wanted to be a fly on the wall, a day in the life sort of movie, and that's what he went with and captured. And I think because of that, it's the most original film he's done in a long time in that regard, because he's not doing a full structured story. It kind of reminds me of his earlier films such as Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction and Jackie Brown, and especially Pulp Fiction in many ways. You've got these really interesting colourful characters. They have different storylines that cross over, which much like this film, and it doesn't really have a clear narrative all the way through Pulp Fiction, and neither does this film, so it feels like he's harking back to a simpler film. It's a more simpler film. Simply executed, simple characters, the dialogue's simple, and it's just a time capsule of a particular era and a particular time in the world when things were starting to change, going from the late 60s into the 70s. And it does look at the Manson family idea, but in a smaller way. It's more in the background rather than the foreground. And he really plays with things within this film that I really like. Cliff Booth is a fantastic character. I could have done a whole movie just with him. I would love to see another, like a sequel to it, would just follow him around, because he's such a fascinating character. And you get a real sense of who he is without him having to say too much or do too much. He's so laid back, so calm, and that's sort of what the film is. It's a very laid back experience. Someone made a good example of this film. They sort of called it a comedy, like it's more of a comedy than anything. And he sort of put it next to Big Lebowski, as I said earlier. And it really feels like that. Because in the Big Lebowski, you have these interesting characters, and they get mixed up in things, and we go, on this journey with them. And it's the same with these sort of characters, but not a lot happens. And I really love that. I think that It's sort of just an easy watch. You don't have to think too deeply about it. There's not some really in-depth tragic story. It's just a simple observational film. It just feels like a breath of fresh air in a lot of ways, and one of the best films this year. And I sort of got more out of the second viewing to really put it into that perspective for me. But it's a film you can look at in different ways. You can look at it as a fairy tale in a way, because Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, it's sort of like a fairy tale sort of film. And look at, you know, our fair maiden princess is, you know, Shannon Tate, and she's a precious, beautiful creature, like a mythical creature that you want to protect and hope that nothing bad happens to her. You've got Cliff Booth, who's sort of like our, you know, hero, our knight, our savior. And then Rick Dalton's sort of like this sort of prince trying to prove himself. And there's a lot of colourful and interesting characters they meet throughout the world. So you can look at it through that point of view. You can look at it through Big Lebowski as a comedy, a fun, entertaining movie, a fly on the wall sort of look at someone's life. The three main characters represented different points of time. So you look at Sharon Tate. Her character represents the future. Things are happening for her. She's looking forward to the future. She is the future in a lot of ways, where Cliff and Rick are ultimately old hat. She's the new hat, the new thing to come out. I think Cliff Booth represents present in that he's always present. He goes with what is happening right there and then. He doesn't worry too much about the future or the past. And when things happen, that's when he jumps into gear. He's very zen-like. He doesn't let things get to him too much. Really fascinating to watch. So he represents the present. And Rick Dalton represents the past. He's caught in the past. Success on the TV show Bounty, just so focused on who he was before that he doesn't really want to make an effort to try and be something different. He's just sort of so focused and stuck in the past. And I think I see that as well watching this film. There's so much in it. It's a film that needs repeated viewing, in my opinion. You pick up a lot more, you get a lot more out of the characters and the circumstances that the characters find themselves in. And it's just great to see a lot of the cameos in it. You know, Damian Lewis plays Steve McQueen. It's Luke Perry's last performance playing Lancer in this TV show that actually exists, that Tarantino bought the rights for, that I think he originally was going to put Luke Perry in, which would have been fantastic. And I think this is a great last scene and last film for Luke Perry. Timothy Olyphant's really good in it as well. He sort of plays the lead on this TV show, Lancer, that, you know, Rick Dalton's coming in to do cameo to play the heavy and play the bad guy. Dakota Fanning's really good in this particular scene. And it's just filled with really colourful characters like that and really great performances. Final verdict. Look, don't go in this film with high expectations. Just go in and let this film unfold. Let it wash over you. Just experience it. Don't have too many ideas of what you want to happen or you think it should happen. And just watch it for what it is. It's a fun, laid-back ride. It's very funny, fun experience and a fun ride. And if you get a good crowd, it's a great experience. There's just something different about this. He was trying something different. He was trying to say something. There's a lot of subtext going on. There's a lot of things happening in this film just underneath the surface that we sort of slowly get to learn as the film goes on. I think it's his most grown-up film, his simplest film, and it just feels like he's sort of done with genre with this film a little bit and just wants to look at this world and this time period that he remembers and really encapsulate what that was like for him and what was going on at the time. And I think this film really does that. For me, I'm going to give Once Upon a Time in Hollywood 4.5 out of 5. I really enjoyed my experience. It's definitely going in my top 10. Such a great and entertaining movie that I sort of want to live there. I want to be part of it. I want to follow. I want to be the passenger along with Cliff Booth as he goes on his journey through LA. I really love that. Anyway, that's all from me today. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit subscribe down the bottom. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.